Hello everyone. In this video we are going to continue our discussion of do loops in Excel using Visual Basic. And for our exercise this time we have a spreadsheet that has two columns of numbers, and this is some data that I got from a student several years ago, a former student I should say. He was working at a government organization where they were measuring concentrations in rivers and canals, and they had all this data to process, and he wanted to it's a very simple, trivial thing, but he wanted to be able to scan through a list of numbers and find where the first non-zero concentration occurs. And so you can see the lengths are shown here in feet, concentration in grams per cubic feet are shown in the next column, and as you go down you'll see at some point those become non-zero and increase, and then it goes back to zero, and then there's another set of numbers here, and this goes on for a long ways. This is a big table. It's 790 rows. And so to give you a better understanding of what these data look like, I'm going to very quickly create a chart, which I'll put up here at the top. So I'll do insert, scatter, plot, and so here's what it looks like. We have the concentration on the vertical axis and the length on the horizontal axis, and there are two distinct non-zero parts here. And so part one, step number one here, is to write code. When you click on the button, we want to start searching in row 5, and we want to go down and find the row where the concentration first becomes non-zero, which in this case would be at length equals 3150. It's on row 68, and it's 0.01, and report that to this cell right here. And so I'm going to scoot this, move that chart down here for a second. And so again, we're starting in row 5. So let's go into design mode, and we'll double click on this button, and let's see, let me reconfigure my window here quickly so that we can see everything. There we go. And so we'll start out with option explicit so that we don't get any, we're going to need some variables here. We don't want to have any bugs, runtime errors, or logical errors based on misspelled variable names. And so let's see, we're going to need a variable to keep track of what row we're on, so we'll call that my row as integer, and we'll initialize that to 5 because that is the row that where we're going to start our search. We're going to start here on row 5, and we're going to look in column C, until we find a non-zero value. So here we go. This is something that works really well in a do loop. And let's say do until cells my row comma 3 is greater than 0. And until that condition is true, we are going to just keep incrementing the row counter. And so basically this little loop does nothing more than it keeps incrementing that row counter until it finds the row where this condition is true. The cells my row comma 3 is greater than 0. So the value on the row number indicated by the my row variable in column 3, if that's greater than 0, it'll stop incrementing. So at this point we have our answer, so we can go back here and let's see. So this is E9 and F9. So we'll say range E9 equals. Now we want to put the length here, the distance coordinate, and that is in cells my row, comma 2. It's in column 2. And then we'll do range F9, and that is cells my row, comma 3. So that should do it. Let's save our changes and exit design mode and see what happens. And so there you go. Starts in row 5, iterate, keeps looping down until it finds this row right here. And once it's found it, it displays it takes the value from column 2, puts it in E9, takes the value from column 3, puts it in F9, and we solved the first part. So now let's go look at part 2. Write VB code to traverse the concentration starting at the bottom until the last non-zero concentration is found. So in this case, we want to find this value down here, the last non-zero concentration. So in order to find that, we need to start at the bottom of the list and go backwards. So we're going to start at row, let's see, 790, and we're going to go backwards. So let's go back here, and I'm just going to copy that code, and we're going to start at row 790. And instead of saying my row equals my row plus 1, we're going to say my row equals my row minus 1. So we're going to decrement that row counter. It's going to go backwards, 790, 789, 788, and so forth, until we find that non-zero concentration going in reverse order. And then we're going to put that in, make sure I get the right cell address. It will be E11 and F11. So we'll change this to be E11 and F11. Alright, so save the changes, and here we go. So 10,950, concentration 1,410. That looks about right based on that. So let's go down here. There it is, 10,950. 1410. So again, if you go down to the bottom here and you go backwards and scroll up, you'll see this is the first non-zero concentration you hit going backwards. So we've solved the first and the last. Now for part 3, we are going to find the maximum concentration and the location at which it occurs. So it's one thing to say, I mean, if we just want to find the maximum concentration, we could just do this. We could just say equals max. Don't need Visual Basic for this, right? And then we could just going to let's see, Control Shift, boom. So the maximum concentration is 7,047, but we also want to know where it occurs. So to do that, we could use, you could use like an index function or a match function. There's a way to do this without using a loop, but our objective here is to learn how to use loops. So we want to write a loop that goes through this entire list. And as it goes through the list, we want it to find the row containing the maximum concentration, and then we will report both the length and the concentration. Now, when I present this to my students, I say, well, okay, how do you think we should do this? Sometimes someone will raise their hand and say, well, we should go until we find a cell where the previous concentration is lower and the next concentration is lower, therefore it's the maximum, and that won't work because as you can see in this chart, there are a number of local maxima that are like these little peaks where the previous and the next concentrations are going to be smaller, but we want the one that's the global maximum, this one right here. And so we need to have a more well thought out algorithm. And so one simple way to do this is to write a loop, and then as we loop through these cells, whenever we encounter a concentration that's bigger than the biggest one we've found thus far, we're going to store that the location where that occurs in a variable. We're going to have a variable called max row that'll keep track of the row where we found the biggest concentration yet. And as we go up, we'll keep every time we find one that's bigger, we'll update that. And then when we get to the very bottom of the array, or the vector here, we should have a record of where the biggest concentration occurred. So let's go do that. So we're going to declare a new variable called max row as integer, and we're going to initialize that to 5. We're going to say, well, the biggest concentration is on row 5 because that's as you may recall, that's the first one in the list. We'll just initialize it to row 5 to start with, and then we'll say my row equals 6. We'll start looping at row 6, and in this case we're going to keep looping until we go through the entire list. So we're going to say range cells my row comma 2 equals blank, my row equals my row plus 1 loop. So we're just building the main structure of our loop. So in other words, we are going to start looping at row 6. We've already kind of processed row 5, and we are going to be looking in column 2, and we're going to keep looping all the way down until we reach an empty cell, which means we've searched through the entire list. So that's all we're doing there. Now, as we're looking at each of these values, we need to do something. We'll have an if statement. If cells my row comma 3 is greater than cells max row comma 3, then this means we've found a new max value. We'll say max row equals my row. So we're going to record that in our max row variable. So again, as we're going through each of these rows, we're going to look at the value in column 3, which is the concentration column, and if the value in that cell is bigger than the value in column 3 in the row containing the biggest value we found up to that point, then we're going to take that row number and make it our new max row value. And now when we get to the end, we should be able to say we're going to, whatever we found, we're going to, but here instead of using my row, we're going to do max row. So we're going to take the value from max row and write the length in E10 and the concentration in F10. So let's give that a shot. I think we're done. Save our changes, and sure enough, it occurs at 9800, 7047.24, which matches what we found using our Excel formula. And so that's about right here. So just shy of 10,000 and just above 7,000 in concentration. So it worked correctly. So there we have it. Some nice little exercise using do loops. Do loops are incredibly flexible. It's just a great little tool to have in your toolbox as you solve problems requiring iteration.